So my name is Dr. Jonathan Cressy, and you are attending a panel. It's called Building a Recording Rig. It was actually a really long title because I was trying to get the panel submission people's attention, so I made it really long. But basically what we're doing is we're talking about creating a system, right? I call it a rig, but you're going to create a recording system to be able to do the stuff that you want to do, whether it's content creation, whether it's podcasting, which I guess is content creation, or whether you're a musician, right? So a little background about me. I run a company called Fundamental Sounds. We are a production company. We're also a record label. And I am a professor of recording, or technically now I'm the assistant professor of sound recording technology at Texas A&M University, Kingsville. So I am all the way down South Texas. And I live in Corpus Christi, and it's fantastic, but very windy. And they canceled class yesterday because it was cold. And so I was sitting in the lobby giving class via Zoom at MAGFest because I had to do it online because they canceled it. So there you go. You can the best way to get in touch with me, and I highly recommend if you have questions, please do not hesitate to email me. I answer all the emails. At my email address at jonathan@fundamentalsounds.com. You can try the other things like Twitter and stuff, but I know everybody hates Twitter now, and I like barely even I'm there. So you can try it, and I'll try really hard to look. The other thing is the Fundamental Sounds at 1867 is my YouTube channel, which will hopefully start bringing some more content like this there. Okay. So, as I was saying at the very beginning, for those of you who just stepped in, this is a panel that is also an Ask Me Anything because I know everybody's going to have a ton of questions. So I'm going to talk about a couple things, and then I'll stop and say, hey, do you have any questions about stuff that involve your recording life? And you can ask me, and we can go through it, and if there aren't, I'll just keep going. All right? So the first thing that I want to get through with y'all is making a recording rig isn't all that difficult, okay? But there are some pitfalls that we have to worry about. And the number one thing have you noticed that everybody cares about video a whole lot, but no one talks about the audio part at all anymore? I feel really left out. Like everybody's like, oh, buy a new MacBook or the new Mac Mini M4. It exports video at like 30 seconds faster than the last one. And it's like, yeah, but how does it work with audio? Nobody talks about it, right? But the thing is, the very first principle, when you are building something, the principle that you have to ingrain in your brain is that bad audio distracts and good audio is invisible. So when it's good, no one cares. But boy, when it is bad, 100% of the people care, right? They will just not listen to your feed. They won't listen to your YouTube video. They'll send you mean comments on YouTube, all sorts of stuff, right? And so we need to pick something that is going to fit the needs of what you're going to do, but also fit within this principle. Because, yeah, we can do this for super cheap. Like, we can do this for like a couple $100. But will that get you what you need, and will that be a waste of money? Because I can tell you right now, if you buy a Focusrite Solo, like, Guitar Center edition, right, where you go and you get like the microphone and the thing, and you decide you want to upgrade, Guitar Center will not even take it back to sell because it is so cheap that no one will buy it. Isn't that interesting? So that aspect of it, that used aspect, just disappears. Like people just will not pick it up. So we have to think about where we're going to spend our money and where we're going to get the most bang for our buck. Because at the same time, I will tell you, I'll tell you later on in this thing, but I'll tell you right now, the worst thing you can spend your money on is plugins. The second worst thing you can spend your money on are interfaces. And the reason is because every time we get a new operating system, every time you get a new computer, you run the risk of not being able to use it because they're basically throwaway now. So you have to be really careful about that high-end stuff that you pick up. So the next thing is you have to determine what your purpose is. Like, why are we doing this? What is this for? Okay? Because there are always trade-offs. You're gonna go one direction because it fits what you do. You can't do like a jack of all trades. Like they are very specific. Okay? Unless you want to spend a lot of money. If you want to spend a lot of money, we can do things that cover all your bases. So you think about it. What are we going to talk about? Are you podcasting? Are you doing video? Are you doing a bunch of people, like 5 people at a panel? Or are you doing ASMR? Right, that's a thing. Are you doing Foley for video games? Are you doing sound design for video games? Are you in a studio? Are you on site? Like some of you, how many of you are on the orchestra stuff or doing orchestra things? A couple people, right? A lot of orchestra stuff, you're recording orchestras, that's on site. You know, there aren't a lot of studios out there that have enough room to put a 150-piece orchestra in a recording studio, right? There might be like 2 in Maryland, maybe only 1. Like maybe Omega, and I think there might be 1 in Towson, maybe. But, so you're gonna be in a hall somewhere with everybody, so you might need portable rig. Is it spoken word or is it music? That's completely different too. I'm going to be giving a talk on acoustic treatment for your room, and that's also a thing. Like, are you doing something involving speaking, right? Or are you mixing music? Because you're going to treat your room differently depending on what you're trying to do. You're not going to do the same things. Any questions about this so far? Do you have any, what are some of the things that you all do? How many of you are interested in this because of content creation / podcasting? All right, excellent, that's a lot. How many people are here to do it because they're recording music? That's also a lot. Some people with same hands, excellent. How many people are doing it because you're doing Foley and sound design for video or video games? A couple people, excellent, cool. Anybody have any questions so far about that are you're itching to get answered? No? All right, we'll keep going. So once you've decided what kind of content you want, and we'll go through some different things, like if it's spoken word or if it's music. Once you've decided on that, then you want to start looking at your gear. Right? This is probably why everybody came, is to learn about the gear, right? So the most fundamental principle that I like to talk about when we talk about gear and when we try to talk about recording is you need to know the recording chain. The recording chain is how a recording system, every recording system, is created, right? So we have a couple things. We have a microphone. It's called a transducer. The reason it's called a transducer is because it takes analog energy, which is my voice, right? Acoustic energy, and it converts it to electricity through one of 2 means. One, it uses a moving magnet. That's called electromagnetic induction, right? So there's no math, but there's some sciencey stuff. And then the other thing is condenser microphones. They use capacitors to do it, and it's called electrostatic induction. And what it does is the audio or the acoustics hit the diaphragm. The diaphragm moves, and that, depending on the type, it actually causes an electrical current to run through the cable and into the mixer, okay? Or into a preamp, I should say, which is the next thing, the amp or the preamp or the interface. Because the amount of signal that comes out of one of these is so small, so tiny, right? You can barely hear it. It is negative 52 decibels. That's how soft the output of a microphone is. You have to have a preamp in order to be able to amplify it to a usable level, okay? And that's one of the next things you need. You need an amplifier to amplify the microphone. Now, what's lucky is a lot of what we buy, you could buy an amplifier, right? Like you could buy a microphone preamplifier from Sweetwater, and they'll gladly sell it to you. And you can buy that preamplifier, and then once it's amplified it, you now need to get it into whatever you're going to do to manipulate this. So let's look at the system we have here, okay? Now, I don't know all of the pieces of this, but let's pretend I do. We have a microphone here, and we have a mixer, okay? Or a mixing console is what we would call this. Okay, so it's a mixer. What are mixers? Mixers are basically preamps, a bunch of preamps, but it could only be one, but a bunch of preamps that are on channels. This happens to be on channel 6, okay? This is on channel 1. And when I play something, so if I break out of this presentation really quick, and I go back to music, and I hit play, let's see, let's just do, hey, we'll do the title track. Okay. You're now hearing that, but you're also hearing me. That's what mixers do, they mix, right? So we get this along with the sound from my laptop coming together. So you might need a mixer if you're doing a podcast where maybe you don't want to do a lot of, like you want to do it very ad hoc, then you can create your own mix live. This is kind of creepy, kind of working out. That worked out pretty good. So that's what a mixer does. It's the preamp. And what it does is it allows you to mix multiple signals together. This one happens to be able to mix, it appears, 10 together, and it will output what you're hearing on those speakers, right? It'll either output 1, which is what those speakers are because they're mono, or it'll output 2 if it were stereo. Now, the reason why it's mono is because what is our purpose of this setup? What's the purpose? Anybody? Yeah, to hear me, right? But to hear just me, right? And like you don't need to have like a stereo field to know that there's a person on this side and a person on this side. Your eyes are telling you that. You just need to hear it as one channel, right? But if we were listening to music, like a lot, like if this was like, hey, let's all listen to music kind of panel, this would kind of suck because it'd be in mono and most music is conceived in stereo nowadays. So in that sense, this is built very specifically for this purpose of having a panel. Yes, sir.
So like in OBS, when you assign audio streams to like channel 1 through 6, what's the benefit of having them broken up into different streams versus just having them all on one?
Okay, so the question is in OBS, you can have multiple streams. What would be the benefit of breaking up your audio into multiple streams? Now, when you say streams, are they channels? Or
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the exact.
okay, I think they're channels. And the benefit of that would be that you could assign those channels to different scenes, or you could actually produce your content in stereo. So that would mean someone listening on headphones would be able to, you could pan people between the two channels, right? One would be left, 2 would be right, and so if you sent somebody to 1, they'd come out of this speaker, or this ear, whatever, and then if they went 2, it'd come out of here, and if they came out of both, they'd be in the middle. So you would have this left, right, center kind of feel, and that might be cool for whatever you were doing. However, you have to remember that most people listen to podcasts and stuff on their phone speakers or on like those like Beat things, right? Those Bluetooth speakers and stuff like that. They're mono, like they're not stereo, so it might not be worth it. But it would allow you, it just allows you more control over what you're doing as far as the presentation of the audio.
Does mono and stereo not associate just to the number of speakers being used with the direction of the audio coming?
Okay, so the question is does stereo and mono only go with the number of speakers, or is it the direction? Well, it's kind of both, because you can't have stereo with just one speaker, because it's just one, and everything will be coming out of that one speaker. Stereo means two or more, really, right? And 2 means you can send it this way or this way, which will give you left and right. Or you can send it to both, which would give you straight down the middle. And so when you listen to it, when your brain will go, oh, I'm hearing something from over there, so it must be over there. So you're creating a virtual soundscape in front of the person. So yes, in order to do stereo, you must have a minimum of 2. But like, for instance, if you were doing surround sound, you have to have a minimum of 5. If you're doing immersive, you have to have a minimum of 7, and it goes all the way up to 14 speakers. Again, if you're doing it in a live speaker kind of thing, right? If you're doing it on headphones, it's a little different. Okay? So one of the things that we do here is, the next part is you have to have a place to put it, and you have to have a place to listen to it. So headphones or speakers are how we listen to what we've just recorded, and the media or computer is what we do to actually record it. So you have to have a recorder. Okay? This makes sense so far? Cool. Now, nowadays, we actually have a thing called an interface. And that interface communicates with a computer. Back in the old days, we used to have to use tape machines, okay, or cassette tapes and all that stuff, and you still do. You can also buy things called hard disk recorders, which allow you to record audio without a computer. So depending on what you're doing, you might want to do that. But computers are really the way a lot of people record stuff, right? So what we have here is we have the interface. All right? The interface is a preamplifier for your microphone and a way to communicate with the computer. So an A to D converter and a D to A converter. And an output amp. So what it goes, you can bring stuff into the computer, it converts it into digital ones and zeros, you can then manipulate it in the computer, record it on the computer, edit it on the computer, do whatever you want on the computer. And then you can hit play and play it out of the computer. And that is what an interface does. How many, yes?
So in like a, I guess like a basic recording music setup,
Mm-hmm.
you might see like a kind of like a mixing board as well as I guess like an interface. Is the mixing board, is that also to just control like, I guess the mixing levels and things like that with all, or is there some advantage to mixing it kind of before it goes into the interface and you're just recording it?
Okay, so this is a good question. So this is in a music situation, if you see a mixing console that someone is mixing on, is that an interface, or is there any benefit to mixing before it gets to the interface? That is a very loaded question. All right, the question is, it's called, in the jargon, it's called analog summing. And people will jump up and down and say, yes, that is the only way to do things. But really what you're doing, so let me just take a step back. Mixing consoles in general, when we used them back in the day, so when I started back in the mid-90s, we used mixing consoles going to tape. And what you did was you recorded your audio onto tape, onto individual tracks on the tape. So we would have a 24-track tape recorder. And every microphone that went into the console would come immediately out of the preamp and go to the analog tape machine and get recorded. So it was untouched. No EQ, no compression, no nothing. Untouched. Direct to the tape. And then the tape machine had outputs. And those outputs would come back into the console using the line inputs. And that would then feed the mixing console. So what you were doing is you were recording it and then playing it back through the console. And then you would have another tape recorder that was a 2-track tape recorder that would then record your mix. It was called bouncing. So you were bouncing from one tape to another. So nowadays what we do is we use the interface to record all of those tracks into our computer, and then the computer becomes the mixing console. And we mix there, and then we save our file, which a lot of DAWs call it bouncing. You bounce a 2-track, or some people call it rendering, and that way you render it. If you do have an analog console in your setup, most likely what you will be doing is playing out of the computer into the recording console and treating the computer like a tape recorder. And then you take the output of your console and it goes back into the computer. So you're recording a print track, which is coming out. So you're going out of the computer, you're mixing it on the console, doing stuff the way you like it, and then back out of the console into the computer. This is it's a very cool way to do it, and entirely not time efficient. So most studios don't do this because it takes a long time to reset the board for every client. So a lot of times when you see boards or mixing consoles, they're actually control surfaces. So they don't touch the sound at all. They just are a physical representation of a digital thing, which ironically is a digital representation of a physical thing. So it's just weird. It's like so all the faders in Pro Tools end up here so you can touch them. That. So the next thing is, now we have to come in with some choices, right? So we have to start thinking about what we want. And the first thing is that microphones and your interface are interdependent. And what that means is, in money terms, if we can go straight to the chase here, the less money you spend on the microphone, the more money you're going to have to spend on the interface. The reason is because microphones have what is called self-noise, right? They make noise. And preamps or interfaces, preamps in your interface, they make noise too. And so if they make too much noise, it actually becomes really hard to listen to. Like if you get really cheap microphones on a really cheap interface, you will hear tss in the background, which is really, really hard to listen to. So for instance, in this setup, okay, we have the output, so we have our microphone, which is an SM58, I believe. Yes? SM58. This SM58 is a dynamic microphone. All right, so I'll flip it over here. It's a dynamic. It uses magnets to make it work. The reason why we use these on panel stages and we use them pretty much all the time everywhere is because they're very, very robust. Right, like I could take this and throw it at you and it would be okay, right? Now, they'd be mad that I took it off and threw it, but that's the reason why we use it. My old professor used to call them hammers. Like you could take them and you could use them as a hammer, as a roadie, and then use it as the microphone that night, and it would be fine. They have their place, though. They are really good at capturing really loud things. So like if you want to record a jet engine, you're going to put a dynamic microphone behind it. If you want to record a screaming guitar cabinet, you're going to want to put a dynamic mic in front of it. If you want to record a screaming vocalist, dynamic mic, okay? What they don't work too good at is soft things. So a lot of people use them for spoken word, like we're using them right now for spoken word. But if we do, we have to make sure there is enough preamp power to be able to make them loud enough. And usually when you turn your interface preamp up, it will start to hiss. And dynamic microphones need 60 decibels minimum of gain to make them even somewhat usable for spoken word. Have any of you ever seen when you buy like an SM7 or one of these dynamic mics for podcasting, they'll send you what's called a FET head, like it comes with it, or like a cloud lifter? Any of that ringing any bells? Yeah, cloud lifter. What those are, they are amplifiers that run off of phantom power, which drives condenser microphones. But what you do is you plug it into the back of the microphone, and then you plug the microphone cable into that, turn your phantom power on, which normally these do not take phantom power, and it basically gives you a preamp in front of the preamp to allow you to use something that doesn't have very clean gain. So like when you're using an SM7 for podcasting, you have to have something like that unless you have a unless you have a more expensive interface which has a quieter preamp. On the other hand, if you buy a more expensive condenser microphone that has low self-noise, you can get away with a cheaper interface because you don't have to amplify it as much. See how it's like sort of like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of thing? It's like you have to decide what's most important. And it depends on what you're doing, right? If you're doing Foley work and recording stuff for video games and things like that, buy a condenser microphone. If you're doing podcasting, you might want to just buy the condenser microphone. However, if you're out there recording guitar amps, that's not where condenser microphones belong. Yes, you can put them there. I'm not saying like you watch a YouTube video and they decide that's what you're going to do. Fine. But Dynamic microphones are better for that because you can play it, your amp as loud as you want, and it won't distort the dynamic microphone. Well, yes, you can put the condenser further away. Yes, you are absolutely correct. That is a correct statement. But see, everything has its own purpose. Now, one thing, yes, ma'am. Yes. Now, one of the things, like if you're a streamer, so the question is she's a streamer, would a condenser microphone be good? Yes, there are a couple things, though, to think about, right? What do you want your online persona to look like, right? Do you want to be like this? Where you got your microphone right here and you're talking to people, and this is in the shot? Or do you want it to be not in the shot? Because if it's not in the shot, then I would recommend like a lapel mic, because that way you can put it somewhere where it's not seen readily, right? And it'll isolate super well because your body becomes an acoustic absorber, and that'll work really good. Or you can get a condenser mic that you could then fly right above the shot, which is what they would do in the movies, right? They put it right above the shot, but I mean it's got to be like right above the shot. Like you've got to like not move a whole ton and stay where you are and keep it right there because it'll be very directional. So I worked with a group, in fact, we did a panel last year, Legends of Avantras, and I helped build their streaming studio. And they didn't want to use lapel mics because they moved a lot and they felt like the lapel mics might make noise, okay? So we then put boom mics out everywhere, and we flew it above the system. So they have a whole rig that can be raised and lowered in order to get them where they need to go. But yes, condenser microphones for like a streaming situation is good because you can get away with a cheaper interface. It doesn't need as much gain, and they tend to be quieter. If you go with dynamic, you're going to have it in the shot. It's going to have to be there because it's going to have to be this close. Like you're going to have to be like right on it in order for it to sound halfway good. Right? And like this is cool for like the whole podcast, like Twitch stream, if you're like, hey, I'm a radio producer kind of thing, like, hey, I'm in the studio, right? Because how many of you have been in a radio studio? Yeah? How close is that microphone to those radio producers? Right? Yep. I don't want to do it because I don't want to like lick the microphone, but they're like right up on that microphone. Like back in the old days, people would have to bring their own pop filters, because like people would smoke and drink a lot, and so you'd get like on a pop filter that had like just like grungy stink on it, and so you'd put yours on so that it would be better. So when you think if you want that radio sound, you might need a dynamic microphone, but it's going to have to be right up next to you. So you have to deal with that. Yes?
So would a dynamic mic be better than if you have like, I guess like a lot of background noise? So like with a condenser mic, it's like more like stuff like the background, or is that some like fixed through like mixing?
Oh, very good question. Okay, so he asked whether a dynamic mic would be best when you have a lot of background noise, or would a condenser and then you fix it later. Okay, number one, let's try not to fix things later if we can stand it. Okay, fixing things later is always a trade-off that never ends well. Okay, unless you have like $1,000 Cedar software, noise is hard. But yes, a dynamic microphone would be better because it's less sensitive. So it'll pick up who's right in front of it, but it won't necessarily pick up things that are off to the side. Okay? It's another reason why it's used as a live microphone, because it helps prevent feedback. So yes, they would be better if you had multiple people talking in like a round table sort of thing, right? But you can get away with it with condenser microphones. You just have to make sure you're placing people in the null area of the microphone where the microphones are not picking anything up. But because they're so sensitive, just the reflections around the room could be enough to pick things up. But again, they'll have to be close to the person, and if you're doing it for video, they'll be in the shot. There isn't a real way to not have them in the shot, okay? So let's look real close about dynamics and condensers really quick. So condensers are super sensitive. Okay, they also, if you buy a cheap condenser, like a a 990, MSX 990 or MX 990 or whatever, those mics tend to have a lot of self-noise. So they're almost just as bad as the dynamic microphones. But if you spend a little bit more money, let's say you're spending on a Neumann microphone, which in the standpoint of microphones is not all that expensive, okay? Like a KM 184 or a KM 150 or something. They're about $500 or something for that one mic. I know it's expensive, but audio is expensive. They have very low self-noise, like 12 decibels, whereas that 990 might have 28 decibels, which is a lot. If you go with a condenser microphone with it, it's very sensitive. You don't need a very fancy preamp to run it, and it can isolate a lot, so it works very well. And it's got a lot of self-noise. Dynamic microphones, on the other hand, as I said, they take a lot of volume. So that condenser microphone you bought is not going to be able to take someone screaming into it, okay? Or for that matter, I recorded a couple years ago a trio, trumpet, horn, and piano. And the horn player, who works at Arkansas State, she actually overpowered my microphone. So she distorted the microphone, not the preamp, not the recorder, none of that. It was the microphone was actually distorting. And that's how sensitive, and this is with the mic in front, right? Because you don't record a horn from the back because no one wants to hear horns from the back. So it's in the front, and she was still pegging it. And I actually had to move it very far away, and I had the preamp all the way down, and it was still destroying that microphone. Sopranos do it a lot too, so if you record a classical soprano, they will just destroy those microphones. So in that sense, sometimes a dynamic microphone is needed because you can't use a condenser. So the idea that condensers are always better isn't always true, right? They actually have situational use. Any questions about microphones? Usually people have a lot of stuff about that. Oh, all of the things. Oh, hold on. Go ahead.
So what would you recommend for like a studio microphone for like a hardcore metal singer?
Hardcore metal singer? Okay.
Like I'm assuming a dynamic mic, right? But
Yes.
you just go with an SM58 or is it like a...
Okay. So the question is, what would I go with a hardcore metal singer in a studio? SM7 all the way, take the pop filter off. And just like scream the hell out of it. Now you can go and get some other like cool dynamic microphones, like old stuff, like AKG made some old dynamic microphones, some Shure old dynamic microphones that might give you sort of like a crusty, it depends on how, like if it's like a grim singer, like you could get some real heft to it, or if it's the clean singer, you might want to use a condenser microphone for the clean singer. But like all of the rock that I've done, I've just done with an SM7, and it works fine. Yeah. Next.
So I generally have a predisposition of being louder than the next guy. Should I just assume dynamic? I'm planning on starting. So should I just go ahead and start with dynamic?
Starting what? Oh, sorry. The question is, he's really loud, and he wants to know what mic to start with.
Like I'm not like singing into it. I'm not doing anything. But the two words my mom said to me the most in my life is "shut up" or quiet.
Right. Okay. Well, but like, what are you going to do? Are you going to do a podcast? Are you going to do YouTube or something like that?
I have dreams of voice acting.
Okay.
I don't have the motivation or the wherewithal to actually start.
Understandable. Okay. So if it's voice acting, I would probably get a condenser microphone, just because they're going to be quieter and they're going to be better quality if you're going to actually do that stuff. If it's just going to be audio for YouTube, then I would go the dynamic route. But yeah, if you're specifically looking to go into voiceover, then I would look to get a condenser microphone that is a hypercardioid, so something like a Neumann KM150 or something. It's a small diaphragm microphone, but that doesn't matter. Like the diaphragm size has no real relevance in this situation. And what it'll do is it'll cut out a lot of what is around you, but it'll allow you to get a lot of this like proximity effect where you can make your voice sound really big, or you can come further away and make it softer so you can get some mic technique in there. But if it's just for YouTube, then I would just get an SM7 and be done with it. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. So this might be something that's coming up later, but my question is, I guess sort of related to like pop filters on microphone, because I have a lot of national accounts, which I don't personally like the sound of.
Mhm.
Is this just something that I need to cut out and work on myself, or is there like a pop filter that I can use on the microphone that doesn't use much?
Okay, so the question is, pop filters, is there a way to reduce sibilance with them? And yes, there is. If you're gonna get pop filters, what I recommend is getting queen size pantyhose, okay, and then either using a hanger and like wrapping duct tape to get it on there, or using embroidery rings, which is what I've used a lot. You get an embroidery ring, and you get a couple layers of that pantyhose on there, depending on what eliminates the sibilance. So what's happening is the high frequencies are going to get absorbed by the pop filter. Normally, pop filters are just for air movement, right? Because you don't want the like, right? You don't want that, and so the pop filter prevents that aspect. The other thing that you can do though is you can actually just be off axis. If you've noticed, I'm not actually speaking into the microphone. I'm speaking above the microphone and off to the side. And that's in order for me to prevent the pop filter from my P's that I have a lot of, that I just said a bunch. And it helps eliminate some of my sibilance. So you just go off axis of the mic a little bit. You don't actually always have to be in the mic. So I usually put a microphone either pointed at the talent's chin or at their nose. And if you've noticed when you watch voiceover actors who do like stuff for Disney, you'll notice that the mic is like way up here. And that's because they're acting in front of it, and the mic is just where it was sounded the best, and that's where it goes. The problem is when you are a producer and you're trying to get someone to sing into it or do something, they will always move their head to be in the mic, always. And like I have to get them to close their eyes or something because they'll crane their neck, they'll do all sorts of stuff. So I would just say start with moving off axis, and then also don't ever spend a lot of money for a pop filter. Ever, ever, ever. Just get the pantyhose, the embroidery ring, stick them together, and then like duct tape it to the stand with a wire. I know it's janky, and usually I used to have a picture in this slide of We Are the World. Like go and watch We Are the World from the 80s. Everybody is singing into the pantyhose coat hanger. That's what, even Michael Jackson, pantyhose and a coat hanger right in front of him. So if it's good enough for Michael Jackson, it is totally good enough for you. It's so weird, like, just the thought of my students coming out, I just spent $50 for this pop filter. And I'm like, what? Like, what? Like, I get it, like, maybe during COVID you could, like, wash a metal one, but you could also just throw it out and do it again, right? Question back there, yellow.
So are there inherent different tonal qualities and dynamic that's produced when you're recording? And does it matter because you can just adjust it is to adjust it or you can adjust it out? Or does that largely end up being device?
Okay, so the question is, do dynamic microphones and condenser microphones inherently have different tone? And does it really matter because you can adjust later? So again, I always try to not to adjust later because it's always just more work, okay? However, every microphone has different tone. Dynamic microphones tend to feel a little thicker because you have to be closer to get spoken word to work. However, if you're screaming into them, they can be just as bright as anything else because you have more distance. Condenser microphones tend to be a little clearer because you don't have to strain your voice so much. But I can also find condenser microphones that are woolly and sound like that. So really what you need to do is you have to look at the condenser microphone's frequency plot. And when you look at that frequency plot, you can see whether there are places in it that are emphasized. So a lot of modern microphones have a bump at 10 kilohertz. And some people call that a vocal lift, but a lot of vocal mics have that. Well, okay, mics are mics. There's no such thing as a vocal mic, but mics that tend to be liked by vocalists have that bump. So that is, I'm not going to go into dissertation why it exists, but that what it does is it makes that brighter. It actually emphasizes the mouth sounds, and it emphasizes the sibilance and the consonants, which make people who speak sound more intelligible, and that's why they like it. But if you're using like a microphone, for instance, like a TLM 170 microphone, which is a Neumann, it actually like tails off when it gets up high. Well, it'd be over here, up high. It tails off, and so you actually get a darker sound with less intelligibleness than you would expect. An SM58 actually has a pretty high bump in sort of the vocal area because that was what it was built for. So it was on purpose that way. So yes, there are differences, but you're going to have to find out what they are from experimenting. Yep. Question.
Piggybacks off that pretty well. There's no adage in recording that you only buy what you can't steal. Have you met a microphone sim that can actually manipulate a bad, say, condenser mic into something that is, you know, there's mic sims for the most expensive mics out there. Are they worth the time and risk of trying to download them, trying to buy them? Is it worth it at all?
Okay, so the question is it worth buying mic sims, and do they work? I think mic sims probably work pretty okay for when you buy them with the microphone that they were built for. So like UAD has one, and Antelope I think also has one, and they where they have like a really flat microphone that they have, and then they use the sim to create a dynamic equalizer like over the top of it to try to turn the sound into the classic sound. It will never be the classic microphone, ever. I personally think that it's not worth it. You can get just the sound that you're looking for much cheaper. Like there's really, I mean really, a lot of what if I can go on a slight rant really quick on equipment, we tend to want the things that we see. Right? I do all the time. Like I watch something, I'm like, oh, that's so cool, I want that. And the thing is that the microphones that we used back in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, which everybody covets now, you're just coveting because the person who was using it was awesome. They could probably have sung into an SM57 and it would have been just as awesome. Like there was no magic in that microphone, it was in the performer. There was a YouTube video, I feel bad that I can't remember the guy's name, but he's like, the great thing about analog isn't its sound. Look that up on YouTube. The dude pretty much nails it, right? The whole reason why everybody loves tape and analog and all that stuff is because you had to be better in order to use it because you couldn't fix anything. It was like if you screwed up, that was it. Like listen to the Mamas and the Papas, what's the song? I Saw Her Again Last Night, right? Listen to that tune because 3/4 of the way through the tune, one of the most brilliant mistakes ever happened. The lead singer came in a half a measure too early. So they're all singing, you know, saw her, she saw her, and then they were supposed to wait a measure, and they didn't. And the guy just goes, I saw her, and then he started again, I saw her. He actually comes in early, and it ends up being awesome because they couldn't fix it. Like that was just what it was. It was like, well, okay, there it is. At least it was in time, right? So don't get caught up in the gear, right? Get caught up in the sound that you want and work to get that. But yeah, I wouldn't worry about the amp sims. They're kind of weird. Yes, all the way in the back. Yeah, it's called I Saw Her Again Last Night by the Mamas and the Papas. Yeah, you have to listen all the way through. Yeah.
Is there a microphone you would recommend for phone recording? And is it possible to make it mobile? I want to change that.
Yeah, so the question is there a microphone I would recommend for Foley? So the two things, and they want it to be mobile. So for Foley, I would recommend a Audio-Technica stereo microphone. Okay, they are AT4025 or possibly 4022. I don't know the serial number offhand. There's also a Shure stereo microphone. Why am I recommending a stereo mic? Because I don't know what, it's like Foley could be picking up a singular thing. Or it could be picking up an ambiance that you want to use, right, in a stereo situation. So I would always get a stereo mic. Those stereo mics happen to be, and if you want to learn more about this, come to the orchestra panel. We'll talk about classical recording, but they tend to be a coincident pair of microphones, which means they are right on, the two microphones are right on top of one another, and that allows you to sum it to mono without any issues. So basically, you can use that as a stereo and as a mono microphone. So it does double duty. Now, it's not the best stereo microphone in the world because I don't like XY stereo mics, but it's good. It's really good for the Foley stuff. Now, what you want to do then is you need to buy a portable hard disk recorder. So you're going to be looking at a Zoom F6. Well, that has 6 microphone inputs, or maybe I think it's the Zoom F4. The sound devices, what is it? Like the MixPre 3, I think, has at least two microphone preamps. But you're looking at one of these portable, battery-powered interfaces. Because what they are is they're an interface and a recorder. And you don't need a computer. You just bring that around, you plug your microphones in, you turn it on, and you do the thing. Right? Even the Zoom, what are they, the H4s and those kind of things, like the handy recorders, those will work too, right? And you just buy the recorder with the thought of how many channels you might need in the future, right? So for instance, if you're doing Foley work and you're thinking about using ambisonics for surround sound stuff in VR video games or whatever, then you're going to need to buy an ambisonic microphone, which has a minimum of 4 inputs. The microphone takes 4 inputs. So you've got to have something that can take that. Yes, sir.
I just want to know that the H4 has XY on top of it.
It does, yes.
And then has 2 XLR inputs.
Yep.
So when I'm doing Foley recording, I like to have 2 mics super wide stereo, and then also having the XY, so I can have a super wide stereo as well as the XY and just hide in the back of my mouth. I have another question.
Okay. Well, if you come up with it, tell me. But the statement was using the Zoom H4, right? It's the H4. It already has a stereo mic built in. The only thing I will say about that is that the stereo mic is connected to the H4. So if you need to get far away from whatever you're doing, up, that's hard because you've got to boom it up and then use an app to start it or whatever, and it's only an iOS app, it's not an Android app, and that's why I go with just get the separate microphone, but that will still work. The handy recorders still work just fine. The thing about the Zoom, if you go Zoom, the F series have 32-bit recording. Does anybody want to know about 32-bit recording? Sure? Okay. 32-bit recording is, they bill it as a way of not being able to clip your recording. Meaning you can record it super soft or you could record it super loud and it won't matter because later on you can just make it lower. And that's because it's math magic. Basically bit depth, when you think about recording, for every bit you get 6 decibels of headroom. So that means a tape recorder, like a cassette tape, had 48 decibels of headroom. So that means technically that was 8 bits, right? I believe, right? 8 times 6 is 48. Math's not a strong suit of mine. So 32-bit, you're talking I don't know, what is that? 32-bit is a lot. Let's see. 256, there you go, 256 decibels of headroom. There's nothing that you can record that is loud enough. You'll break your microphone first, which by the way, that was the recorder I was using when I peeked out the porn player. Right, so yes, it does work. In fact, they won't even let you mess with the gain. You just hit record and it just does it. So it's one of those, it makes it a little easier so you don't have to worry about peaking. But 24 bits is a lot too. That's 144 decibels of dynamic range. I mean, you got to be super loud to make that not work. So, right, slightly quieter than a jet engine. So that's one of the benefits to the Zoom recorders, but sound devices also have the 32 bits. The handy recorders don't have that at the moment, but I'm sure they will in a matter of a year or whatever. Okay? Yes?
You want to do like recording, say, spoken word and or music,
Mm-hmm.
like vocals specifically. When you didn't, like, there's a lot of house noise, different and stuff like that. How might it be enough to cut that noise out, specifically for like the spoken word streaming type of thing, or would you just go for that?
Okay, so the question is, if you're in a very noisy environment and you're recording spoken word, is a lapel mic, is that enough? And I think it is, yes. Because lapel mic, and that's why they use them on TV sets. It's because they very much isolate. What I would do is I'd go on YouTube and I would Google how to put them on, because there is a very specific way to put them on. I have a friend who does a lot of Broadway stuff, and he taught me how you can hang it in your hairline and do stuff where no one would know it was there, but it picks it up really good. And I can't. I mean, maybe I should do a panel on it. I don't know, but he taught me how you there are special there's a loop that you can make that hides it if that's important, or at least it keeps it from moving, so it won't make as much noise when you move. So one thing that I want to say is that I would spend your money, if you're going to spend money, you spend it on microphones or a microphone. That's where the majority should go, because it is the one thing that will hold its value the most. Okay? You can get rid of a nice microphone pretty easy if you decide you don't want to do it, or if you want to upgrade. But if you've got, the Guitar Center Special that was $50, no one's going to want it. You'll just have to give it to somebody. So it kind of depends. Now, granted, don't get yourself into debt over this stuff, right? Start where you can start and then move up from there if it doesn't meet your needs. But this is where I would do it. The thing that I would not spend money on is plugins. You do not need them, okay? Every DAW comes with plugins, and they are absolutely fine. And until you either can't do what you want using them, or you have become such a master of them that you have moved beyond it, don't buy them. I have over 2,000 plugins, and I use 7. Seriously, because every time a plugin bundle came up and it was well, it's only $50. I mean, if I could have all that money back, it would be great, right? So just don't buy them, especially now, because DAWs come with them. Even Reaper comes with perfectly good, serviceable plugins that sound fine. Yeah, they're ugly and they're hard to work with, and we're going to learn about compressors on Friday, tomorrow. If you want to learn about how to use a compressor, I'll show you how to do it, right? But it's not worth, especially Logic. How many of you use Logic? Well, everybody who uses Logic here is being blessed with a reverb plugin called Bricasti. Or no, sorry, Quantec. They gave you a Quantec reverb. Quantec Yardstick is a $5,000 reverb, okay? It is a lot, okay? And that plugin, because I own a Quantec, that plugin sounds just like it, and you got it for free, right? And so those are the kind of things, that's one of the things that Apple is doing, is they are creating really good plugins to differentiate themselves from every other DAW in the market. Okay, now this brings us to the DAW stuff. Okay, what DAW should we use? Use the one that is in the field that you're trying to work in. Okay, there has been a kerfuffle online. I don't know what Avid did to this YouTuber, but he went on this rant about how it's not the industry standard anymore, and Pro Tools is awful and I hate them and all this stuff. Totally okay. I don't like Pro Tools either. However, if you are going to work in a studio or with a studio, they may require you to have it, because that is the type of session they expect. So when you pick a DAW, these are the considerations you want to pick. It's not just because I like it, but it's who are you going to be working with? So for instance, in the music industry, Pro Tools is 100%. Okay, let's say it's 70%. There's some people who use Cubase, but not a lot. They're usually composers. No one likes it when they get it. Like, no industry person's like, oh, great, I have a Cubase session, right? They want the Pro Tools session. And a lot of people at home use Logic, or they'll use Cubase, or they'll use something other than Pro Tools. Pro Tools is like where studios are with it. Just know that if you don't want to use Pro Tools, that's cool, but you might not be able to work with some people because they won't have the ability to read your sessions. Because DAW sessions are not cross-platform. You must physically move stuff out and in. It's a very complicated process. So it's something that you need to think about. However, like for instance, if you like, it says up there genre, like if you're a classical musician and you do editing, like you're recording your orchestra and you need to editing, right? Reaper, 100%. It is the only 3 and 4 point editor, source destination editor that you can buy that's for Mac, right? And it's cross-platform, so it's Mac and PC. All the other ones are PC only, like Pyramix, and they cost like thousands of dollars. So Reaper is huge for that one thing. For me, if I'm recording bands, I'm recording in Pro Tools. Not because I like it, but it is the best at recording, like acting like a tape recorder. Like it is the best at acting like a tape recorder. And being able to comp tracks and stuff, it's just super easy and good. But if you want to do MIDI, it's terrible. Like the worst MIDI experience known to man is there. If you want to do MIDI, maybe you need Ableton Live, because Ableton Live is like built for MIDI, right? Or Cubase for that matter. Steinberg invented the VST, right? So they're all about the software instruments. So you want to pick a DAW that fits your industry. And that's what you want to work in. Now, sometimes if you are just delivering the raw deliverables, like you're like, here, this I'm done, then it doesn't matter. But if you're sending, like if you're a musician and you're sending your mix to a person to mix, like you're not the mixing engineer, you're just the recording engineer, then that person's going to have to open your session and be able to mix with it, or you're going to have to provide them with stems that they can then import into their session, which you're paying for, because it takes time to do that, and you're going to be charged, I guarantee, right? So you want to work with what is there. And that guy who had the rant on YouTube, it was funny because in his rant he said it's not the industry standard. I mean, like everybody where I am uses it, but that doesn't mean everybody should use it. I'm like, well, but everywhere you are, they use it, right? You know, so maybe like it's the industry standard and in your region, right? So it's one of those things you don't have to just, like you don't pick Pro Tools because it's the industry standard. It has to be your industry standard or your regional standard. Like for instance, where I did a lot of work in Maryland, a lot of studios used Reaper. So I would teach people how to use Reaper because a lot of the studios used it and they expected Reaper projects. So that's what you would use. Again, worst thing to buy is a plugin. Just don't. Not until you like absolutely, like maybe noise reduction if you really need noise reduction. Just be aware with noise reduction, if this is a thing, if anybody has this question, the AI noise reduction, albeit amazing, is different every time you run it. Because it's AI. So every time you feed it your track, you will get a different result. So that's not okay a lot of the times, right? So stick with things like Isotope RX or Sound Soap or something like that where it's more algorithmic and you can mess with it and try to work with it that way. One last thing before I go. I just want to talk about headphones really quick. I got like 2 minutes. So the thing is using speakers in a studio is fantastic if you have a treated studio. If you don't have a treated studio, your best bet is going to be using headphones. If you want to mix, use open back headphones. If you want to track or if you want to do something in isolation, i.e. you don't want everybody to hear what you're doing, use closed back headphones, okay? This is a very controversial thing to say, but it's less controversial than it was. Okay, I've been using headphones to mix for 15 years, okay? I didn't own a pair of studio monitors for like a decade, okay? So you can do it, you've always been able to do it, and it was always fine. But people don't like to hear it, but there you go. But now everything is into it because everybody is doing production and no one has the money to treat their room, okay? Although I will be talking about acoustic treatment, so you can come and learn about it. But like headphones are great. So just remember that if you're mixing, you want something that's open-backed. But you cannot use that to track. You can't use that for anything that needs isolation because they literally make noise, okay? All right, thank you very much. Thank you for asking so many questions, and I will be here all week. So thank you, really appreciate it.